Run if you want to live, because the night only spares those who refuse to surrender. Claire Whitmore had repeated those words in her mind ever since the first howl shattered the silence behind her, but tonight they felt less like hope and more like a fading prayer. Moonlight spilled across the towering pines of Black Hollow Forest, turning every branch into a silver claw stretching across the narrow trail. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts as damp leaves slipped beneath her worn boots, each step threatening to send her tumbling down the rocky hillside. She had never been the fastest wolf. In truth, she had never truly been one at all. While every young Omega in Moonridge Pack had awakened their wolf before adulthood, Claire's gift had remained silent, leaving her trapped between two worlds that neither accepted nor understood. To some, she was cursed. To others, she was proof the moon goddess had abandoned her. Earlier that evening, whispers had become accusations had become fear, and fear had driven the frightened pack to force her beyond their gates. They claimed strange disasters had followed wherever she walked. Crops failed. Hunting parties returned empty-handed. Children dreamed of shadows whenever she passed their homes. Claire knew none of it was true, yet truth rarely mattered once enough voices chose a different story. The cold mountain air stung her lungs as another distant howl rolled across the forest, answered by several more until the entire valley seemed alive with haunting echoes. She refused to look back. Looking back meant accepting they were close enough to see. Looking forward meant believing there might still be somewhere left to run. Her hands trembled as she pushed through thick brush, sharp twigs catching the sleeves of her faded gray coat, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was staying one step ahead of the fear chasing her through the darkness. Then the forest changed. The familiar trails disappeared beneath ancient trees whose trunks were wider than old cottages. The wind carried a scent unlike anything she had known, crisp pine mixed with rain and something older, quieter, powerful enough to calm the frantic pounding inside her chest. Even the distant howls faded into uneasy silence. Claire slowed without meaning to. Every instinct warned her she had crossed an invisible boundary, one no ordinary wolf dared enter. Stories whispered around winter fires suddenly returned to her memory, tales of forgotten lands where the Alpha King claimed dominion and where no pack trespassed without permission. She almost laughed at the cruel irony. After spending years wishing someone stronger might notice she existed, she had wandered into the one place where even the bravest wolves feared to set foot. A soft breeze stirred the branches overhead, carrying with it a presence she could not explain. It did not feel cruel. It did not feel welcoming either. It simply felt as though unseen eyes had already found her long before she realized she was no longer alone. Claire swallowed hard and took one careful step deeper into the silent forest. Somewhere beyond the sea of ancient pines, a single pair of luminous amber eyes slowly opened in the darkness. Claire Whitmore remained frozen beneath the towering pines, unable to pull her gaze away from the pair of glowing amber eyes watching from the darkness. Every frightening story she had ever heard about the forbidden forest returned at once, each warning whispered by elders who believed no ordinary wolf ever crossed these ancient borders and returned unchanged. Her pulse hammered against her ribs as the silence around her grew deeper. There were no insects singing, no birds settling into their nests, not even the restless wind weaving through the branches. The forest itself seemed to be waiting. She took one cautious step backward, and a dry twig snapped beneath her boot. The sound echoed far louder than it should have. The glowing eyes disappeared. Claire swallowed hard, her heart sinking as she realized losing sight of whatever had been watching felt even more terrifying than seeing it. She turned, searching for any path that might lead away from the strange clearing, but every direction looked the same beneath the silver moonlight. Massive pine trunks surrounded her like silent pillars, their shadows stretching across the forest floor in shifting patterns that made every trail seem uncertain. A sudden wave of dizziness forced her to steady herself against a weathered tree. Only then did she notice the sting along her palms where rough bark had scraped her skin during the desperate escape from Moonridge Pack. She wrapped her arms around herself as the mountain air grew colder, wishing for the warmth of a fireplace she no longer had and a family that had chosen fear over faith. A faint rustling drifted through the undergrowth nearby. Claire held her breath. Instead of another howl, she heard something unexpected. Slow breathing. Deep. Steady. Powerful enough to carry through the stillness like the rhythm of distant thunder. Curiosity quietly challenged her fear. Moving one careful step at a time, she followed the sound until the trees opened into a small clearing washed in pale moonlight. There, resting beside a smooth stone, lay an enormous black wolf unlike any she had ever imagined. Its coat shimmered like polished obsidian beneath the stars, while streaks of silver reflected across thick fur with every slow breath it drew. One front leg rested awkwardly against the ground, and although the magnificent creature remained alert, exhaustion lingered behind its bright amber eyes. Claire instinctively stopped several yards away. The wolf lifted its head but made no threatening movement. It simply watched her with remarkable patience, almost as though it had expected her arrival. Every sensible thought urged her to leave before the creature changed its mind, yet another feeling quietly rose inside her, one she had carried since childhood whenever she found frightened animals hidden near the edge of the village. Compassion had always spoken louder than fear. Slowly, carefully, she knelt and searched the forest floor until she found broad, healing leaves her grandmother had once taught her to recognize. Their cool scent filled the air as she crushed them gently between trembling fingers. The wolf continued watching without a sound. Claire hesitated only a moment before taking another cautious step forward. She whispered softly, more to calm herself than the mysterious animal before her. "I do not know who you are, but I know what it feels like to be alone." The amber eyes never left hers. Instead of retreating, the great wolf lowered its head slightly, and for the first time that night, Claire felt something impossible. The forest no longer felt like a prison. It felt as though fate itself had quietly opened a door neither of them had expected to find. Claire Whitmore moved with careful, measured steps until she stood only a few feet from the great black wolf. Her trembling hands held the crushed healing leaves while her breathing slowly matched the quiet rhythm of the mysterious creature before her. The wolf remained perfectly still, its brilliant amber eyes following every movement without a trace of fear or hostility. Moonlight settled across its thick coat, revealing tiny flecks of silver that shimmered like scattered stars. Claire had never seen anything so magnificent. Even the strongest wolves from Moonridge Pack looked ordinary compared to the silent guardian resting before her. She lowered herself onto one knee and gently extended her open hand, allowing the wolf to decide whether it trusted her. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the enormous animal leaned forward just enough to catch the scent of the herbs resting in her palm. A soft breeze drifted through the clearing, carrying the fragrance of pine needles, fresh earth, and distant rain. Claire smiled for the first time that night. It was small and uncertain, but genuine. Carefully, she placed the healing leaves beside the injured leg instead of touching the wolf directly. Her grandmother had always told her that true kindness never forced itself upon another soul. It simply waited until trust appeared on its own. The wolf lowered its head again, watching as Claire slowly wrapped the herbs with a strip of clean fabric torn from the edge of her own sleeve. She worked gently, whispering quiet words that no one else had heard since her childhood. She spoke about peaceful mornings, warm bread cooling on old wooden windowsills, and wildflowers blooming after spring storms. They were simple memories from a life that suddenly felt impossibly distant. The great wolf listened, without moving, almost as though every word carried meaning beyond ordinary conversation. Time slipped quietly through the forest. Claire eventually leaned back against a broad tree trunk, exhausted after the endless chase through the mountains. Her eyelids grew heavy despite every effort to remain awake. The strange clearing no longer filled her with terror. Instead, an unfamiliar calm settled around her like a warm blanket on a winter evening. Somewhere in the distance, another pack released a chorus of howls into the night, but none dared cross the invisible boundary surrounding the ancient forest. Claire barely noticed. Sleep claimed her before fear could return. Several hours later, The first pale light of dawn filtered through the towering branches above. Claire opened her eyes with a sudden gasp and immediately searched the clearing. The great black wolf was gone. Only flattened grass remained where it had rested throughout the night. For a brief moment she wondered whether exhaustion had created the entire encounter. Then she noticed something resting upon the smooth stone nearby. It was a dark wool cloak, finely crafted despite its simple appearance, folded with deliberate care. Resting on top lay a polished silver clasp shaped like a crescent moon surrounded by ancient oak leaves. Claire reached toward it cautiously, her fingertips brushing the cool metal. The instant she touched it, a quiet voice echoed from somewhere beyond the trees. "You have a rare heart." She looked up in surprise, but the forest revealed no one. The voice had already disappeared into the morning mist. Unaware that the owner of the cloak had watched over her until sunrise, Claire gathered the garment around her shoulders and stepped forward, never imagining that every choice she had made during the night had already changed the course of a king's destiny as surely as it had begun to change her own. Claire Whitmore followed the narrow trail as morning light slowly spilled across the ancient forest, the dark wool cloak resting around her shoulders with surprising warmth despite the cool mountain air. It fit as though it had been made for someone far taller than she was, yet it carried a comforting weight that eased the uneasiness lingering inside her. Every few yards she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the great black wolf watching from between the towering pines. The clearing where they had spent the night gradually disappeared behind her, but the memory of those steady amber eyes refused to fade. She had entered the forbidden forest believing she would never leave it alive. Instead, she carried with her a cloak, a mysterious silver clasp, and a question that grew larger with every step. Who had spoken to her before sunrise? The trees slowly began to thin until the forest opened onto a winding stone road unlike anything she had ever seen. Smooth gray stones stretched toward distant cliffs where elegant towers rose above the morning mist. Their rooftops reflected the rising sun with flashes of silver and deep blue, while banners bearing the image of a crowned wolf stirred gently in the breeze. Claire stopped walking, convinced she had wandered into another world. Before she could decide whether to continue, the sound of approaching horses echoed along the road. Instinctively, she stepped aside, lowering her eyes as a small caravan came into view. Several riders wore dark uniforms embroidered with the same crowned wolf she had noticed on the distant banners. They slowed as they approached her, exchanging puzzled glances before one elderly driver climbed down from a wagon carrying baskets of fresh bread, vegetables, and woven blankets. His kind eyes settled on the cloak draped across Claire's shoulders, and his expression changed from caution to quiet respect. "You should not be standing alone out here," he said gently. "The mountain mornings can be unforgiving." Claire hesitated before answering. "I became lost during the night." The old man nodded as though her explanation answered far more than she intended. "Then perhaps fortune has decided to guide you instead." Without another question, he invited her onto the wagon, offering warm bread and fresh water. Claire accepted with grateful hands, surprised by kindness that expected nothing in return. As the caravan continued toward the distant city, she noticed the soldiers greeting travelers with calm confidence rather than fear. Families smiled as they passed. Children waved at the guards. The atmosphere felt completely different from Moonridge Pack, where suspicion often arrived before compassion. Several hours later, the towering gates finally stood before them, carved from pale stone and framed by statues of majestic wolves looking toward the horizon. Claire quietly admired every detail while trying not to draw attention to herself. She never noticed the tall rider who had appeared behind the caravan moments before reaching the gates. Dressed in a simple dark traveling coat without royal markings, Adrian Ashcroft observed her with thoughtful silver eyes from horseback. No one greeted him with ceremony. No one announced his arrival. They simply stepped aside with silent respect. He watched as Claire thanked every worker who helped unload supplies, smiling warmly even after everything she had endured. A faint smile touched his own expression. She still believed she had met only a wounded wolf in the forest. She did not know that the stranger now watching her had been beside her throughout the longest night of her life, or that the city welcoming her home belonged to the very king whose identity remained hidden behind an ordinary traveler's quiet gaze. Claire Whitmore expected the magnificent city to reject her the same way every place before it had, yet the people inside its towering walls greeted one another with quiet courtesy instead of suspicious whispers. She followed the elderly merchant through broad stone streets lined with flowering window boxes and busy market stalls where bakers laughed with blacksmiths and children raced across sunlit courtyards. The peaceful rhythm felt almost unreal after the fear that had driven her into the forbidden forest. When the wagon finally stopped beside a modest guest house used by travelers and workers, the old merchant thanked her for helping unload supplies and insisted she stay until she found her next path. Claire accepted with humble gratitude, determined to repay every kindness she received. Throughout the afternoon, she swept the front steps, carried baskets for elderly visitors, and helped prepare simple meals in the kitchen. She never expected praise. Helping others had always come naturally, even when no one believed she deserved compassion herself. As evening settled across the city, one of the older housekeepers accidentally dropped a heavy basket filled with fresh apples near the courtyard fountain. Before anyone else reacted, Claire hurried forward, gathering the fruit with a warm smile and gently reassuring the embarrassed woman that accidents happen to everyone. Watching from the shade of an ancient oak tree stood the same dark-haired traveler she had unknowingly met only through amber eyes the night before. Adrian Ashcroft wore plain clothing that blended easily with the crowd, allowing him to move through his own city unnoticed whenever he wished. Few understood why their king often walked among ordinary people without ceremony. Adrian believed a ruler learned far more by listening than by being announced. His silver eyes followed Claire as she quietly encouraged a frightened young stable boy whose hands shook while caring for an older carriage horse. Instead of scolding the nervous child, Claire patiently showed him how to approach the gentle animal with calm breathing and steady movements. Within moments, the horse relaxed, lowering its head as though it trusted her completely. Adrian felt the same quiet certainty he had sensed in the forest. She did not command loyalty through strength. She inspired it through kindness. Nearby, Captain Marcus Hale, commander of the Royal Guard, observed the exchange with growing curiosity. "She's been helping strangers all day," he said quietly, without realizing Adrian already knew far more about the mysterious young woman than anyone else. Adrian answered without taking his eyes from Claire. Some hearts remain gentle even after the world has forgotten how to be gentle with them. Marcus glanced toward the simple cloak still resting across Claire's shoulders and lowered his voice. "She does not know where it came from." Adrian allowed himself the smallest smile. "Not yet." As dusk painted the sky in shades of gold and violet, Claire wandered toward a peaceful garden tucked behind the guest house. There she discovered an elderly groundskeeper struggling to lift a cracked stone planter that had shifted after recent storms. Without hesitation, she knelt beside him and helped steady the heavy container until fresh soil could be packed beneath it. The grateful old man thanked her warmly before returning to his work, never revealing that he served the royal household itself. From a nearby balcony overlooking the gardens, Adrian watched the moment in thoughtful silence. He had spent years surrounded by nobles eager to impress him whenever they recognized his crown. Yet the one woman who expected nothing from him continued choosing kindness when she believed no one important was watching. He did not realize that the quiet admiration growing inside his heart would soon force him to reveal a truth capable of changing both their lives forever. The following morning began with clear skies and the comforting sound of church bells echoing across the royal city, yet an uneasy feeling lingered in the air that Claire Whitmore could not explain. While helping arrange baskets of herbs outside the guest house, she noticed several royal guards exchanging unusually serious glances before riding toward the eastern gate. No one spoke loudly, but whispers traveled quickly among merchants that strangers had been seen near the city borders, asking unusual questions about a young woman wearing a dark cloak with a silver clasp. Claire instinctively reached for the cloak resting across her shoulders, unaware that every description matched her perfectly. She quietly folded it and carried it inside, hoping to avoid unwanted attention without understanding why her heart had suddenly begun racing. From the upper balcony of the royal residence, Adrian Ashcroft watched the movement below with calm eyes that concealed growing concern. Captain Marcus Hale approached with measured steps before lowering his voice. Scouts from Moonridge Pack have entered the outer villages. They claim they are searching for someone dangerous. Adrian remained silent for several moments. He knew exactly whom they sought, and he also knew fear often disguised itself as righteousness. They are not looking for danger, he finally replied. They are looking for someone they failed to understand. Marcus nodded. Shall I order them removed from the territory? Not yet, Adrian answered. I would rather learn the truth they intend to hide. Meanwhile, Claire spent the afternoon helping prepare food for travelers arriving before sunset. Among them was a weary elderly woman whose hands trembled so badly that she nearly dropped a steaming bowl of soup. Claire gently steadied the bowl and offered her own seat beside the fire. The grateful woman smiled through tired eyes. Kindness always finds its way back, dear child. Never forget that. Those simple words warmed Claire far more deeply than the fire itself. She had almost begun believing she could build a quiet new life within these peaceful walls. As dusk settled across the city, dark clouds gathered unexpectedly above the distant mountains. A cold breeze swept through the streets, carrying the familiar scent of pine from the forbidden forest. Claire paused near the courtyard fountain as an uneasy memory returned. The amber eyes, the quiet voice, the impossible sense of safety she had felt beside the great black wolf. Before she could lose herself in the memory, hurried footsteps crossed the stone path behind her. A young palace messenger stopped, breathing heavily. Excuse me, miss. A traveler asked me to deliver this to you. He placed a small leather pouch into her hands before disappearing back into the crowd. Inside rested a smooth black stone carved with the same crescent moon she had seen on the silver clasp. Beneath it lay a single folded note written in elegant handwriting. Trust the one who protected you beneath the pines. Claire stared at the message in complete silence. She had told no one about that night. No one should have known she had ever entered the forbidden forest. High above the courtyard, Adrian watched her discover the note, his expression growing thoughtful as another figure stepped quietly into the shadows behind a nearby archway. Hidden beneath a dark hood, the stranger observed Claire with careful attention before slipping away unnoticed, leaving Adrian with the unmistakable feeling that someone else had begun following the same trail that destiny had already chosen. The next morning, the royal palace awakened beneath bright autumn skies as preparations filled every courtyard with quiet purpose. Messengers crossed polished stone walkways, musicians rehearsed for the evening gathering, and nobles from neighboring territories arrived through the towering gates dressed in elegant ceremonial colors. Claire Whitmore remained unaware of the importance of the occasion. She spent the early hours arranging flowers inside the great hall after one of the housekeepers asked for her help. It was peaceful work, and she welcomed the chance to keep her thoughts away from the mysterious note hidden safely inside her pocket. Every time she read the words, "Trust the one who protected you beneath the pines," the memory of the great black wolf returned with startling clarity. The calm amber eyes, the silent understanding, the impossible feeling that someone had seen her worth before she ever believed it herself. As the afternoon sun drifted lower, guests began filling the magnificent hall. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light across polished marble floors while musicians played gentle melodies that echoed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Claire quietly remained near the edge of the room, adjusting floral arrangements and making certain every table looked welcoming. She preferred remaining unnoticed. It was safer that way. Suddenly, the lively conversations faded into complete silence. Every noble, every servant, and every royal guard turned toward the enormous entrance doors. They opened slowly, revealing a procession of royal guards dressed in black and silver. Without a single command, everyone lowered their heads in respect. Claire glanced around in confusion before following their example. She had never witnessed such perfect stillness. Then she heard steady footsteps approaching across the marble floor. Curious, she slowly lifted her eyes. The man walking through the center of the hall wore an elegant dark coat embroidered with the crowned wolf she had seen throughout the city. His silver eyes remained calm, thoughtful and strangely familiar. Claire felt her heart skip as recognition slowly settled over her. It was the quiet traveler she had seen several times since arriving at the city. Around her, voices whispered with reverence. "Long live Alpha King Adrian Ashcroft." Claire froze completely. Alpha King. The words echoed through her thoughts until every memory from the forest suddenly aligned. The mysterious cloak, the silver clasp, the voice before sunrise, the impossible feeling of safety. Her gaze drifted toward Adrian, and for one brief moment his silver eyes met hers with the same quiet warmth she had once seen reflected within glowing amber eyes beneath ancient pines. Before she could speak, a loud gasp spread across the gathering. Moonlight streamed unexpectedly through the tall windows, although the sun had not yet set. A soft silver glow surrounded the crescent clasp fastened to Claire's cloak, illuminating the fabric with gentle light. The room fell silent once more as elderly members of the royal court exchanged astonished looks. One whispered words barely above a breath. "The moon goddess has acknowledged her." Claire looked down in disbelief, instinctively reaching toward the glowing clasp. Adrian stepped forward with calm confidence, stopping several feet away rather than closing the distance. His expression carried neither command nor expectation, only quiet respect. In a voice that reached every corner of the hall, he spoke with gentle sincerity. "No one will ever force your path, Claire. Whatever destiny is written, the choice will always belong to you." At that moment, every fear she had carried since leaving Moonridge Pack began to loosen its hold, replaced by something far stronger than certainty. It was trust. Silence lingered inside the great hall long after Adrian Ashcroft finished speaking. No one dared interrupt the quiet moment as the silver glow surrounding Claire Whitmore slowly softened into a gentle shimmer around the crescent clasp fastened to the dark cloak resting on her shoulders. She searched Adrian's face, trying to reconcile the thoughtful traveler who had quietly observed her kindness with the Alpha King now standing before the entire court. Every memory from the forbidden forest returned with remarkable clarity. The patient amber eyes, the enormous black wolf resting beneath the ancient pines, the quiet voice that had thanked her before sunrise. At last she understood. He had never hidden from her to deceive her. He had hidden because he wanted to know whether kindness could still exist without the weight of a crown. Claire lowered her eyes for a brief moment before taking one careful step forward. The gathered nobles watched in complete stillness. Some expected her to kneel. Others expected her to retreat in fear. Instead, she offered the same gentle smile she had given frightened children, weary travelers, and forgotten servants since arriving in the city. "You are the wolf," she whispered softly. Adrian answered with equal honesty. "And you are the only person who saw more than a beast in the darkness." Warm afternoon light streamed through the towering windows, bathing the marble floor in soft gold as an elderly woman dressed in flowing silver robes stepped forward from among the royal advisors. She carried an ancient staff carved with moonflowers and bowed respectfully before both of them. "Your Majesty," she said quietly, "the moon goddess has revealed what many believed impossible. Yet the sacred bond has not been sealed. It waits for a willing choice, never for force." Adrian inclined his head with calm respect before turning back to Claire. "Then nothing changes unless you wish it to." His words settled over the hall with unexpected power because every person present understood the significance of what the Alpha King had just done. He had placed destiny itself beneath the freedom of one young Omega who had once been chased from her own home. Claire felt tears gathering in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the unfamiliar feeling of being trusted. For the first time in her life, no one demanded that she prove her worth. No one insisted she become someone else to earn acceptance. Adrian simply waited. Claire slowly removed the folded note from her pocket and looked at the familiar message once more. "Trust the one who protected you beneath the pines." She smiled as though the words had finally found their meaning. Taking another steady step, she closed the distance between them and gently placed her hand in Adrian's open palm. The silver clasp upon her cloak glowed once again, brighter than before, while a peaceful warmth spread through the great hall like the first sunrise after a long winter. It did not overwhelm. It comforted. One by one, the members of the royal court lowered their heads, not because they feared power, but because they recognized a moment built upon compassion rather than authority. Captain Marcus Hale smiled quietly, and even the oldest advisors exchanged relieved glances. They had witnessed many ceremonies through the years, yet none had begun with such simple humanity. Adrian looked at Claire with quiet gratitude instead of triumph. "Welcome home," he said gently. Claire realized those two words described far more than a palace. They described the place where she had finally been seen, believed, and accepted exactly as she was. Morning arrived with a brilliance that seemed to wash away every shadow lingering over the royal city. Sunlight danced across the palace towers while church bells echoed through the valley, carrying news that spread from marketplace to village faster than the mountain wind. The Alpha King had chosen not through power, wealth, or noble blood, but through the quiet courage of a young Omega whose greatest strength had always been her kindness. Claire Whitmore stood beside Adrian Ashcroft on the palace balcony, overlooking thousands of citizens gathered below. She could scarcely believe the same hands once trembling in fear now rested calmly against the carved stone railing. Only days earlier, she had been running through the forest believing the world had no place for her. Now she stood where every path in her life had quietly been leading. Adrian stepped forward, his voice steady and warm enough to reach every corner of the great square without ever needing to rise in anger. "A kingdom is not measured by how it honors the powerful," he declared. "It is measured by how it protects those who have been forgotten." Claire came to these gates carrying nothing except compassion. That is the greatest strength any kingdom can possess. The square remained silent for one unforgettable heartbeat before waves of respectful applause swept through the crowd. Merchants smiled. Children cheered. Elderly couples nodded with quiet satisfaction. They were celebrating not simply because their king had found someone worthy of standing beside him, but because they had witnessed goodness recognized before greatness. Among the gathering stood several travelers from distant territories, including a few uneasy faces from Moonridge Pack. They lowered their eyes, remembering the frightened young woman they had once driven into the darkness. Claire noticed them, and for a brief moment old memories returned. The lonely nights, the whispered insults, the endless feeling that she would never belong anywhere. Then she looked toward Adrian. His expression carried the same calm certainty she had first seen reflected in the amber eyes of the great black wolf beneath ancient pines. He had never rescued her by taking away her choices. He had simply believed in her until she found the courage to believe in herself. Claire took one graceful step forward and addressed the crowd with gentle sincerity. If fear can convince good people to turn away from one another, then kindness can help them find their way back. Her words settled over the kingdom like a peaceful promise. Even those who had once doubted her felt their hearts soften. Captain Marcus Hale smiled quietly while the royal advisors exchanged approving glances. They understood the future of the kingdom had already begun changing, not because a new queen had arrived, but because compassion had finally found a place beside the throne. As evening painted the mountains with shades of gold and lavender, Adrian and Claire returned to the same balcony where the first stars slowly appeared above the forest stretching beyond the city walls. Far below, life continued with laughter, music, and hope. Far beyond the ancient pines, a lone silver wolf lifted its head toward the rising moon before disappearing peacefully into the trees, as though the forest itself had accepted that its quiet duty was complete. Claire smiled as a gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of pine through the evening air. She finally understood that destiny had never been about escaping the darkness. It had always been about finding the one light that chose to stand beside her until she could see her own. And from that night forward, whenever people told the story of the Alpha King and the gentle Omega, they always remembered the same truth. True strength never begins with power. It begins with kindness that refuses to disappear, even when the whole world forgets to believe in it.